Well, what is the study of history? When you're studying history, what are you actually studying? Anybody know? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Primary source documents?
Primary source documents?
Or primary sources.
Okay. Study of history is the study of primary sources.
And secondary.
And secondary sources. Okay.
Legends.
Getting closer. Anybody else?
Cultures and.
Yeah.
I forgot how you worded it last time.
Oh, this is you're trying to remember.
Yeah.
No, I don't want your memory of what I'm going to say. I want you to tell me what you think. So somebody who hasn't taken my class before, when you study history, what is it you're studying?
Study of science.
Studying the past. Okay. What else?
Around the culture.
Okay. Good. I need to get your name, by the way.
Jamar.
Okay. I need to mark you present. Okay. All right. So to me, history is the study of the documented past. Okay. We have about 5,000 years of written history. We've had about 5,000 years of cultures producing written materials to tell their story in various forms. So for us, the study of history goes back about 5,000 years. Anything before that is anthropology or archaeology. In order for it to be history, it has to be documented. It has to be the study of the documented past. Now, that being said, we do use archaeology and anthropology to study history. We use it to give context to the documentation, but it's not history unless it's the documented past. So here's an example of documented past. This is a Sumerian tablet in cuneiform, which is a fun way to write. You stamp with a tool and make little wedge-shaped. This is probably a record of a trade transaction, and it dates back about 5,000 years. There is more life that goes back much further than that. If you are a new Earth creationist who believes the world is only 6,000 years, this is going to be a very frustrating class for you. Not as frustrating as World Civ 1, but pretty frustrating.
Say, Mindy,
Yes.
your presentation is not on the screen.
Oh, you're right. Let me do a new share. Okay, how's that? You got it now?
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Okay, cool. So we do have artifacts that go back much further than that, which means that the potential is there for us to discover more documentation. There's been times in the study of history where we found something and gone, oh, we didn't even realize that was writing. We thought they were just making pretty pictures. And then it turns out to be a language. And then now it's documentation. So it's possible, because we know that life goes back hundreds of thousands of years, that we will find more historical documentation as we plunge, further and further backwards. Well, we're going to have to work with the archaeologists and the anthropologists to do it. And historians are not famous for being cooperative with archaeologists and anthropologists. So here are some examples of evidence that life goes back a lot further than that. 35,000-year-old artifacts in caves, bone flutes from Israel that date back 100,000 years. Probably one of the oldest things is our tools, the carved tools that date back almost 2 million years, which tells us that human life goes back a pretty long way. But the documentation of that life only goes back about 5,000 or 6,000 years. So that's the study of history, the documented past. And it's not very much. We don't have very much history to study when you look at the whole of creation. When you look at how long humans have been documenting their past, 5,000 years, it's like if the whole history of the universe were compressed into a single day, humans would not even exist until 4 seconds to midnight. And they have only been documenting themselves in a way that we can read as historians for a certain amount of that time. So there's not enough of it. It doesn't go back far enough. And the other problem with studying history is that it can only be studied from a distance. How many of y'all have ever been to Los Angeles? All right, so I've driven from Los Angeles to here. Don't recommend it, but I've driven from Los Angeles to here. I've flown from Los Angeles to here. The trip is much faster if you fly. But if I were to try to watch that entire trip from the air, like peering out the window, I was watching the entire trip when I was driving, sorry. But if I were to try to watch the entire trip from the window, what I would be able to see would be much less. Now, as we get closer to the ground, we discover there's more and more and more to see. If you were able to make that trip on foot, you'd be able to see much more of it, but it would take much longer. If you were making the trip as an ant, You'd be able to see a whole lot of it, but it would take a really, really long time, probably more than your lifetime, to make the trip. So when we study history, it can only be studied from a distance, because the closer you get to it, the more you discover there is to study. You can study an entire minute of history over the course of one semester. The minute that JFK was shot, there's a university, I think it's in Kentucky, weirdly. There's a university in Kentucky that offers the minute JFK was shot as an entire semester. You go an entire semester and you only cover 1 minute of history. That's crazy, isn't it? But it's possible to do it because there's so much material to study. We are going to go from about 1607 to about 1867. Oh, this is US History 1. It's not, though, is the thing. Let me double check that. No, this is, I just have the wrong slide there. Okay, we're not. We're doing about 1607 to about 2020 in this class. So we're going to study around the 1400s, 1500s to about 2020, and we're only going to do it in 15 weeks. So we have that amount of time to make this trip, okay? So we're going to miss a lot. We're going to do our best, but there are going to be times where you're like, go back, I want to study that more. And there are going to be times where like, why are we dragging our way through this? And the reason for that is because there's only one way to do this, and that's studying at a distance. So it's a problem. The study of history feels pointless. Those who refuse to study history are doomed to repeat it, but those who do study history are doomed to stand around helplessly while everybody else repeats it. So the study of history feels helpless. It feels hopeless sometimes, because the application of what you learn when you study history doesn't seem like it's going to help us much. So why do we do it? Why do we bother studying history? And there are some valuable skills that you can learn. One of the things that studying history gives me is the ability to step out and be objective. When I watch what happens, for example, when I watched what happened at the Capitol, it was possible for me as a historian to step out and go, well, here's some interesting things about that. It's a gift to be able to do that. It's a skill that you can learn. It's something that you can, where you can say, we don't have to fix history. We're just here to study it. And surprisingly, that's really useful, especially when you're studying things like the Holocaust, to be able to say, we don't have to fix it. We're just here to study it. When you're studying slavery, when you're studying the civil rights movement, when you're studying the Trail of Tears, the ability to step out and say, we need to look at what's happening, but we can do that without getting emotional because we are historians. That's a gift to be able to do that. It gives you critical thinking. When you plow through history, you have to plow through all different sources of documentation. Is it possible to document history without being biased? What do you think?
No.
You don't think so? I don't think so either. How can you? You're a human being with your own perspective. You're going to decide what's important and what's not. It's not possible to not be biased. So the ability to sift through documentation and figure out what is propaganda and what is factual, that's a real skill that you learn from studying history. And finally, it brings you a skill of empathy. The people that we study who are parts of these civilizations were people. They made decisions the same way you make decisions. They might have different resources, but they are still human beings making decisions with whatever they've got available. So you develop empathy as a result of studying history. We talked when I first asked, what is the study of history? I had some people throwing out some sources, and that's true. Documentation comes in 3 different kinds of sources: primary sources, secondary sources, and tertiary sources. A primary source is something that is produced by a participant in the event at the time that it is happening. Okay, so a letter, a journal, to some degree a newspaper article. If it's a certain kind of reporting, it's a newspaper article. Marriage licenses, court records, speeding tickets. These are primary source documents. Tweets are primary source documents. And boy, we're going to have a lot of those going forward in the future to study. I'm super excited to be teaching this class 20 years from now. Secondary sources analyze primary sources. So a secondary source is something that takes something and then analyzes it. Takes a primary source and then analyzes it. And tertiary sources take the primary sources and the secondary sources and throw them together to make a point. Your textbook is a tertiary source because it takes primary sources and secondary sources and then puts them in an order specifically to make a point. What the point of your textbook is, I leave to you to figure out. I don't even know. Okay, so for example, here's a letter that Hitler wrote. This is a primary source. This is a letter that Hitler wrote about his opinion about which individuals should and should not live within civilized society. This is a secondary source, Hitler's letters and notes. It's a compilation of Hitler's letters with a little bit of commentary and a little bit of analysis included in them. So that's a secondary source. And a tertiary source takes all of those things and puts them together to make a point. History is the study of all three of these kinds of sources. Is there any kind of source that can be written that is unbiased? All right, so everything I send you, every document you read is going to have a bias to it. It's going to be through the perspective of somebody 100 years later. It's going to be through the perspective of somebody who lived through it or who didn't live through it. Somebody who wants you to see, for example, American textbooks or American history textbooks are written so that either they want you to see that America has had a troubled past, or they want you to see that America is exceptional and heroic. And you can read that when you read the textbook. So it's your job as a historian to sift through that and try to figure out what the bias is. Usually they tell you right there in the intro paragraphs what it is they're trying to do. The study of civilization is a whole extra layer to that. Now this is a world civilizations class. Yes, I used a civilizations game graphic. Anyway, for Jordan, you knew. Anyway, the study of civilization, the thing about history is you can study history like a timeline. It's boring, but you can do it. Civilization doesn't have a timeline. Civilization has a shape. So to study a civilization, you have to learn about that civilization's shape. So that's what we're going to do in this class. We always start with primitive societies. And it makes it easier for us to study the fact that primitive societies follow a very predictable pattern. My old students, what's the pattern? Do you remember? You're getting close. Okay. Primitive societies follow a very predictable pattern. They follow the food and they flee the weather. So early primitive societies form around the idea of following food. They forage for food, they hunt for food, they fish for food, they go to where the food is. So they form in the places where food is. They go to the places where there's plentiful game to hunt. They go to the places where the vegetation is good. They go to the places where the fishing's good. They go to the places where the food is. They also flee from the weather. Human societies move into areas that have livable climates. If the weather is always trying to kill you, then you're going to die, because that's what people do. When weather tries to kill them, they die. So it forces you to, they move into the areas where the weather is predictable, where it's not constantly taking them by surprise. And they move into an area that has good shelter, caves, forests, or the ability to build shelter out of the materials that are there. They move into areas where they can create a family group that will thrive. Strong men, strong women, strong offspring, so that they can expand. Family groups turn into clans, clans turn into tribes, tribes turn into villages. And at some point, somebody has the bright idea to stop chasing the food and just make it where you are. Instead of finding where the food grows, grow it where you are. Instead of finding where the animals are, breed them where you are. At some point in every civilization, somebody has this bright idea of stop chasing the food and make the food instead. And when that happens in a civilization, we call it the Neolithic Revolution or the Agricultural Revolution. Most of the societies you're most familiar with probably had their agricultural revolution about 10,000 years ago. Some of them as old as 30,000 years ago. But for the most part, human was foraging up until about 10 or 15,000 years ago. So, and then somebody had this idea, let's plant food. Most societies develop beliefs around these things. And those beliefs tend to begin by being animistic. Now, this is going to be a test term, so learn this. Animism, it's going to come up. Animistic religion gives spirits to things that are found in nature. And it makes sense when you think about it. If a places can be holy. If a place provides you with a lot of food, then that place is nurturing. So that place becomes like a mother or like a parent at any rate. If a place is mean to you, it becomes like a demon place, an evil place. It takes on its own spirit. If an animal teaches you something, if behaving like an animal gives you a skill you didn't have as a human, then that animal takes on the aspect of a god, like the rabbit god, or the lion god, or something like that. You know, you learn how to do things from the bear, and therefore the bear becomes its own divine spirit that teaches you things. Animism also tends to lean pretty heavily on ancestors. You are the culmination of the existence of every ancestor that came before you, so they must still be watching you. So you have to honor them, is a part of animistic religions. And animism filters down into every other kind of religion. So these things are things that primitive societies begin to believe that become a part of the religions of the modern day. So we're going to have to talk about the fact that these places start animistic. Very predictable. The last thing that happens after you have become a village is that your village begins to trade with other villages, and eventually you all decide that you're going to trade in kind of a central place, and in that central place somebody builds something tall, something that can be seen from a distance. The most common shape of the tall thing is a pyramid. Why is the most common shape of the tall thing a pyramid? Because it's the easiest one to build, right?
Works. I mean,
As cool as it would be to think aliens taught everybody how to make pyramids, the truth is that's the simplest shape to build that actually won't fall down in a good windstorm. So you have pyramids in Egypt, you have pyramids in South America, you have pyramid shapes in North America, you have pyramid shapes in Africa, and you have pyramids in Asia. I wasn't going to leave them out. But they also have mountains. So all you have to do is put like a cap on the top of a mountain. I'm kidding. Anyway, another shape that takes is a mound. There are a lot of cultures that their tall thing that they build is a mound, which is really just a smooth pyramid. Okay. So this practice of building a tall thing makes it possible for somebody to find their way to you, to trade with you. And then that tall thing becomes a city, a place of worship that's surrounded by a market that becomes a place to protect, that you build a wall around. That walled place becomes a city, that city becomes a city-state, and eventually then you have countries that are linking a bunch of city-states together. It's very predictable. It happens over and over and over again in society. We are in World Civ 2, so a lot of that developmental stuff, if you're interested in that, we study in World Civ 1, but we're going to kind of pick up after a lot of civilizations have already kind of done that. So the three foundational things that form a civilization that you have to study that give it its shape are geography, technology, and theology. So geography, countries are shaped by the place that they form. Everybody flees the weather and chases the food, but they find solutions to those in different ways. So if you follow the food to the coastline and form a fishing village, then a lot of your society is going to be built on the geography of that river or that coastline. If you go up into the mountains, then you're going to become a society that's shaped by the mountains that you're living in, by the deep forest that you're living in. So geography has a lot of big deal about it. Most of the early formations of society formed around the biggest river basins in the world. So that happened like, 80,000 years ago. So when the ice melts and the riverbeds reveal and the fertile soil, shows up, you start to see civilizations. The second thing is technology. An entire civilization can be built on a very simple technology, and everything will kind of come out of that technology. For example, the wheel. The wheel was basically formed in ancient Greece as a pottery device, and then somebody turned it sideways and was like, hey, check out what this thing can do, and then pulled wagons with it. You know who didn't do that? Ancient South America. Think carefully. When was the last time you saw a picture of marauding Native Americans in which they had a wagon? Think about it. No, you know why? Because their technology is not based on the wheel. Their technology is based on traveling by foot, by porters. And that if you don't think that shapes your society, if you have an entire civilization that's based on the wheel, then you also have a civilization that's based on roads, guarding those roads, maintaining those roads, the government required to create and guard and maintain those roads. If it's based on porters and beasts of burden, then if it's based on the horse, domesticating the horse, which you'll find in like, we're gonna say Western Asia, or I guess Middle East, civilizations are based on domesticating the horse. Our whole society becomes about the horse. So Technology is a big deal. Pottery, whole civilizations based on pottery. And finally, religion. How your civilization pulls their beliefs out of animism to create something new shapes everything about their government, their morals, their community expectations, what it is that they think is important, what they teach their children, their ideologies that they hold on to and the ones that they chase out. So the foundational principles of a civilization are geography, technology, and theology. So here's what you're going to do. Over the course of this semester, you're going to pick a country. You're going to start by picking that country, and you have to pick that country by Sunday night at 11:59. It's not open yet. I'm not making this mistake again. It's going to be open right after class. Okay, so right after class, you can get on and pick your country, but I'll go ahead and show it to you, and then we'll come back. Okay. Can y'all see my blackboard, Alicia, Sam? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's under the World Stage Project. And the World Stage Project, the idea is you're going to take this country that you choose, and you're going to write 3 research essays about it. And then you're going to write 1 final analytical paper about it. Now, the 3 research essays are short. They're packed with information. But they're short, 300, 600 words at most, okay? The analytical paper is about 600 to 1,000 words, so it's going to be about 2.5 to 5 pages at the most. This is not a huge project, but you're going to do it all semester. Your country that you choose, you're going to answer 3 basic questions about that country. And you can't see this yet, sorry, because I haven't opened it yet. The first one is going to be, what are the foundational principles that shaped your country? What are the foundational principles? What was the technology? What was the theology? What was the geography? The second one, you're going to choose an interaction that your country had with another country. I prefer if it's the first interaction they had with them. For example, I had somebody a couple of semesters ago who had Argentina as his country. So he wrote about the first time the Germans showed up in Argentina. That's a big interaction right there. It's earlier than you think that happens, but it opens a door for an influx of Germans at another time in history into Argentina. So that was which one he chose, and it was a pretty funny essay, actually. I recommend that you, while you're researching the foundations of your country, that you also get a pretty good idea of where it is and which one it is, because I had some people with some confusion. Some countries sound like other countries. It's weird. Anyway, I had a delightful student, so smart in every other way that I almost feel bad for saying this, but the student thought that they were writing about New Mexico. Anyway, so important information. So that's going to be the second research essay you do, is about an interaction that your country has with another. The third one you're going to do is about Western ideals, because in every country in the world stage today, Western ideals have filtered into that country and had an effect. Sometimes the effect is for that country to change into a whole nother country. Sometimes it is for it to knee-jerk and push those ideals away in a violent way. So what Western ideals have come into the country you're studying, and how have they affected that country's culture? You know, so for example, Western ideologies like Christianity or capitalism try to filter into, say, Afghanistan, and Afghanistan reacts. How exactly? You notice what's not on the list this time, Chris?
Yeah,
Yeah, I bet you did. Anyway, so that's going to be your third essay. Then you're going to take all of these 3 things, and you are allowed to slightly plagiarize yourself in the final paper, because your final question, your analysis paper for the semester is going to be, where does your country fit in the world stage today? And how have these things contributed to that? The foundations, the interactions, and the collision with Western ideology. How have they put where does your country fit in the world stage today, and why? And you are allowed to plagiarize your own essays for this. Not allowed to plagiarize anything else. I want to put my foot down and be really, it's too easy not to plagiarize for me to be tolerant of plagiarism. Don't copy and paste things. Reword them and then cite them. You know, if I say, I have a vision that someday all of us will be able to live in peace regardless of our ethnic background. And I put in quotes, in parentheses, king, right? Because I didn't come up with that idea myself. just put it in parentheses at the end of the sentence, just in case. And if I say directly a quote and I don't put it in quotes, but I'm very hard on plagiarism. It's too easy not to do it. So yeah, don't plagiarize.
It's still gonna be MLA format.
It is MLA format, and I have put all kinds of MLA works cited, how to cite in-text citations, all that stuff is actually in your final paper. So I might move that stuff out of that folder and into the main folder so you can read it for your research essays too. That would make sense, actually. I should do that. It's a good idea, Jordan, thanks. Okay, so that's your overarching project for the semester. So by Sunday night, you have to go onto this discussion board and choose your country. Okay, here's the list of countries. Woo! Okay, you should be able to get to that on Blackboard, I think. Maybe? Yeah, I just think you can't get to the discussion board until after class because,
Yeah, it's not open.
yeah, well, it will be, but it's not yet. I'm gonna be like, and go. They're all beautiful countries with amazing things to learn about them. Don't be afraid of something just because you've never heard of it before. The other thing that you'll have is that after lectures, I'll give you a quick assignment to do, and that will show up here in your class materials. What I'll post in each one of these folders will be the PowerPoint with notes, the Zoom recording, and then probably a primary source document, not this week, but starting next week, there'll be a primary source document and an activity that has to do with either the lecture or the primary source document. Everything is always due Sunday at midnight. So after class, you have all the time until Sunday at midnight to turn these things in. It should be really easy to navigate. And then finally, you'll have 3 exams. My exams, the way that I do my exams is, let me see. I don't think I have any of them up where I can put them. Well, what you'll do is you'll click on the exam folder and there'll be 2 exams. One of them is multiple choice and it'll be 30 questions. The other one will be essays, and on the outside of the essay exam will be the essay questions. So you should be able to read them well in advance, research your answers, come up with them. The essay exam only opens once, so once you open it and put your answers in, you can't go back and fix it. The multiple choice is timed. Otherwise, I don't use Respondus. I don't use, what was the other one that everybody was using? ProctorU.
Oh, God.
Oh, I don't need that kind of headache in my life. So your tests are basically going to be open exam, open notes, open internet, open whatever else you got, open friends. I don't care. It's timed. It's amazing to me how often people fail them anyway. It's weird. They're timed. They're based largely on the PowerPoints. There might be a Quizlet before that, depending on how generous I'm feeling the week of the exam.
And we're actually gonna do that this year.
Maybe. I don't know. I didn't do it last semester and I missed it. I was sad not to do Quizlets. Or not Quizlets, Kahoots. That's right. Not Quizlets, Kahoots.
Wow.
Well, I did the Kahoot challenges on my online class. I just went, I challenge you, and sent a Kahoot link, and then people did it like 17 times and then passed the test. What do you know? So for the most part, those will be the 3 exams. Like I said, if you show up, my class is really easy to make an A in. As a matter of fact, it's kind of embarrassing. I worry that eventually my bosses are going to be like, we need you to change that. Because last semester I was like A, B, and then a couple of Fs because people just didn't show up. They didn't show up, they didn't do the work, and then they were surprised. Anyway, your points are almost always entirely in your hands. Very little of what I assign is subjective. I assign it, you do it, I grade it, it's all you. It's all you basically, almost all the way through. So those are your expectations. That's your syllabus. It's all basically here where you can get to it.